Okay, welcome back everyone to another episode of The Exchange. Today is going to be myself and Chude speaking about the COVID vaccine and the mark of the beast. As I'm sure you guys have all heard, there's been a lot of controversy, a lot of misinformation, a lot of cancelling, but hopefully myself and Chude are going to bring some clarity to the conversation. So I don't have any kind of medical background. I'm not the medical expert. But I will be looking to Chude for some of the more, I guess, credible medical insights about how we can think about this and approach this. With that being said, Chude, would you mind just giving us some of your medical background or credentials or insights so that we can just help understand how, I guess, qualified you are to speak into this conversation?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. As Demi said, my name is Chude. So I did my undergrad in biology. And it kind of, by the time I got to my final year, it was like specializing at genetics, cell biology. And then I've done two postgrads. So I've done one postgraduate diploma in biomedical science. And then I just finished my master's in biomedical blood science. And then my dissertation was on the coronavirus. So I was looking at preventing the binding of the coronavirus to the cell in our body, which is called like the spike protein, the spike protein of the cell. I don't want to get too technical, but basically whatever binds the coronavirus to kind of the receptor in our cells. I was looking at how we can prevent that binding with a drug that we already use for blood clotting.
Okay, so you actually did your dissertation on something related to the coronavirus.
Yeah, it was unintentional. So I didn't know about the coronavirus until about March. I didn't know it existed. It was meant to be on Alzheimer's, but they kind of drafted, I guess, everybody in due to the situation.
Oh, okay. So they wanted to gather as much knowledge as they could about the vaccine. I mean, about the virus, given the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm assuming so. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, thank you for that background. I mean, Chude goes into a lot of detail, in our conversations outside of this immediate conversation about a lot of the commentary relating to the pandemic. So I thought you'd be a great addition to this conversation. With that being said, let's just go through a few. We're going to go through various points relating to this, mark of the beast, whole vaccine issue. And the first thing I wanted us to talk about is the very recent Letitia Wright controversy. So I don't know if you guys have seen or heard about this controversy, but basically Letitia Wright retweeted a video from a pastor. I'm not sure if I'm going to say his name, but basically I listened to some of the video and he was talking some madness. I'm not going to lie. He was talking about how the media and big corporations and government were conspiring with each other, and that there was an agenda behind this pandemic. I mean, yeah, there's an agenda behind the this vaccine. So I don't know, have you heard about the Letitia Wright controversy? What are your thoughts on what she did?
Yeah, I did. So somebody sent me the video, another scientist, my friend, she's a pharmacist, and she sighed. she sent me it. Yeah, she signed it. She sent me it. So I didn't watch it. When I saw the person who did the video, I rolled my eyes and I wasn't going to watch it. This was kind of like early on. I think she just tweeted it not too long ago when it was sent. And then I was at work at the time. I look at my phone again a few hours later and I'm seeing people saying Letitia Wright is getting cancelled. I was surprised at the response. I thought it would just be one of those things where people will roll their eyes and keep scrolling. I was surprised at the response, considering that quite a few people seem to be quite apprehensive about the vaccine anyway. So that surprised me, to be honest.
Yeah, she actually deactivated her Twitter account, so I'm not sure if her manager.
Oh man.
Yeah, and I think I love Letitia Wright personally. I think she's a very lovely, personable person, at least from what I've seen of her. So it's unfortunate that it went that way. But I did see a lot of her comments, and I'm not a fan of the fact that she retweeted that video. To be honest, I think the
Yeah.
video was garbage. I think the video was misinformation. But her personal comments that I saw was that she was just saying that let's not just take it for face value. Let's think about this. I'm concerned about what I'm putting in my body. So I think in terms of her concern, I'm fully aligned. I think it's a legitimate concern to have. And I think it's one that we shouldn't just take the face value information available to us. But I think in these very pressing times, we need to be very careful about information and misinformation. And I do think in that sense, she was a propagator of misinformation. But yeah,
Facts, yeah.
I'm definitely not with the whole cancel culture that we're currently in, where you know, if someone says something that's against the grain of normal thinking, that they're cancelled. So I think it's unfortunate she released the video. I
Yeah.
think it's also unfortunate that she got cancelled as a result of it, because I think
Yeah.
her whole angle was, look, let's not just take what we've been given as factual information. Let's ask questions. Let's express our
Exactly.
concerns. And I
Yeah.
think with that sentiment, I completely understand where she's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, one thing I wanted to explore further in this conversation is, I guess, what is your understanding of the mark of the beast? Because some Christians, and some notable Christians, unfortunately, have drawn a connection between the mark of the beast and this vaccine.
Mm. What I find interesting is that the mark of the beast seems to change every so often. Like every few years, the mark of the beast seems to be something different. If it's not a vaccine, it's a chip or it's 5G. Like, yeah, it wasn't the mark of the beast like 5G a couple of months ago. So I don't see why it keeps evolving. I think a lot of us have got our theology, unfortunately, from the Left Behind films. And when they came out, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, and a lot of us kind of like, we don't have maybe great eschatology. I will admit, neither do I. Like, I'm only recently kind of reading into it a bit more. So kind of like end of times theology. Like, I don't think a lot of us have it. So we've developed our understanding from what people have said from films, and that has caused us to think the mark of the beast is literally anything. It can be anything essentially. Like, there is no kind of clear cut understanding of what it is. So from my understanding, the mark of the beast is essentially people who disobey or go against God, and they signify this by idolatry. So they worship the beast, or Satan, who isn't God, the Antichrist. So what I also find interesting though is that people talk about the mark of the beast, but they don't talk about the mark of Christ, which is spoken about in Revelation 7. It also talks about it in Revelation 14. So people usually stop at like verse 11. But if you look at the following verse in verse 12, it says, so this is like a warning to the saints to persevere so that you don't fall prey. So like it seems to always be one-sided when we talk about the mark of the beast. And I also think people make a distinction between the mark that is, let's say it is a physical mark, like it's a tattoo. So like if you're for Christ, you can like accidentally get it, or you can, or like if you get it on your hand, it will somehow change what's in your heart. And if you don't hold to the doctrine or the position that you cannot lose your salvation, then I guess that does make sense. But if you hold to the fact that you can't lose your salvation, and if you're in Christ, then you are His forever, then it doesn't quite make sense why that would happen. And I think what we should really consider is that the mark of the beast is more a reflection of what's already in your heart. And that if you're against God, then you're going to worship someone else anyway. And that mark, whatever it is simply a reflection of your rebellion against God anyway. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this coronavirus, conspiracy theories, is that not, from what I've seen, no notable theologian or no credible Christian leader has drawn a link between conspiracy theories and the pandemic or the vaccine. Like it's always the same kind of like pastor or people that just love conspiracies. Like, and
Yeah.
I want you guys to think about it. I can't think of a single credible theologian. Like, think about someone that is well reputed for their theology. Come out and say that this thing is the mark of the beast. And unfortunately, in a similar sense, there's a lot of Christians that I see, you know, those kind of Christians that are always given over to conspiracy theories. It's the same people that are always sharing like the same like suspicions in group chats and conversations. Like some people, I don't know if it's because of like paranoia or mistrust, are always given over to conspiracy theories. But the thing I find funny about these conspiracy theories is there's always like some bread trail. Like if you reverse the name of a company or if you turn the six upside down. And I'm just thinking, if I was an evil organization like the Illuminati, would I believe in subtle signs of my evil plot? Like it doesn't make any sense. Have you ever watched those? Have you watched those animes where like the good guy will be fighting the bad guy, and the bad guy will explain his plan? Like, I wanted to kill the village, but you know, this is the reason why I was doing it. Like, this is real life. Do you know what I mean? Like, the bad guy is not going to be giving you like hints and tips about what they're doing so that you can kind of follow the trail, but them still like remain in the shroud of mystery. If there is really an evil organization, like a high power that is perpetuating, you know, coordinated scandals between the government, media, and you know, the various branches of power in our society, do you think that they'd want to be found out or discovered? So, you know, the way these conspiracy theories try to like follow bread trails, apparent ones, you know, use 666 and turn it upside down and convert it. It's like, it's absolute nonsense. But I think you raised an important point about eschatology. And eschatology, for those of you who don't know, is basically your doctrine of the end times. And to be honest with you, like eschatology is a subject that I've, you know, really avoided for a good portion of my Christian walk. But I'm beginning to realize increasingly that eschatology, your doctrine of the end times, is very important. Because if you have a certain eschatological view, a lot of these mark of the beast conspiracy theories will fall flat on their head. But again, that depends on what school of thought you belong to. I'm definitely going to, you know, be looking more into that and deciding where my eschatological views sit personally. There is a line of thinking that says, you know, we're in the end times, and you know, things are getting worse. But when you really look at things realistically, like a lot of the evils and tragedies that have been happening now have happened throughout history, and there's arguably been many worse times than we are in now. So I think we have to be very careful about how we approach this from an eschatological perspective. And I'll definitely encourage Christians to, you know, define their end times doctrine, to understand eschatology better, because I think if you did so, a lot of these mark of the beast conspiracy theories would make absolutely no sense to you whatsoever. But I think a key point that is even more important than the eschatological conversation is the doctrine of salvation. And I was reading, I think it's Galatians, that talks about the gospel. Is it Galatians 4:6? I don't know. I can't remember what verse it is. But there's a verse that talks about the gospel being preached to Abraham. And I found that verse so fascinating because, it's Galatians 3:8. It says, Scripture foresaw that God would justify the Gentiles by faith and announce the gospel in advance to Abraham. All nations will be blessed through you. I mean, Paul makes this point in the book of Galatians and the book of Romans 4. I think it's Romans 4. It's definitely somewhere in Romans. But the point he makes is that the faith that saved Abraham is the same faith that saved us. And I think the theme of scripture is that we are justified by faith. In other words, it's our belief in Jesus that justifies us, and it's our unbelief that condemns us. And I think that's a consistent theme throughout scripture. I think there's a consistent unifying theme of scripture. So as the faith that Abraham and the patriarchs had that justified them before God is the same faith that justifies us. Now, why is this point important? Because a lot of the ideologies that surround the mark of the beast imply, in regards to the doctrines of salvation, that people can unintentionally or unwittingly receive this mark and lose their salvation. And that completely contradicts the consistent narrative of salvation by faith in Jesus Christ. And actually, when you look at the book of Revelations, the mark of the beast is tied to worship. So Revelations 19:20 says, and the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone. And a key theme of the people that affiliate themselves with the mark of the beast in the book of Revelations is worship, an intentional, conscious, concerted effort to give your affections and your desires to Satan. That is what I believe the mark of the beast symbolizes. And one thing you have to understand about the book of Revelations is that it employs heavy symbolic imagery. So when we go to Revelation chapter 13, verse 16, it says, and also it causes both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand of the forehead, so that none can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is the mark of the beast, the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of man, and his number is 666. And people take that 666, and like you said, you know, people have made it tattoos, it's 5G signals, it's the food you eat. But, you know, one thing about all of these ideas about what the mark of the beast is a lot of them aren't consistent with the doctrines of salvation. In other words, whatever the mark of the beast is, you know, we can have our guesses and speculations about what this mark of the beast is. It's nothing unconscious. It's nothing unintentional. It's nothing where, say, for example, you're a believer, you're spirit filled, you love Jesus, and one day a van of guys comes up, you know, tattoos you with 666 and you're condemned. Like this way of thinking about salvation completely contradicts the tradition we've been given throughout scripture. So the only thing I can conclude is that maybe people with a dispensational theology might think that you know, in the end time, salvation works differently from the way it did in various other times. But I would say that's complete nonsense. I think from the beginning to the current time, there is only one means by which man can be saved. I think is it Peter makes that point in the book of Acts, that there is only one name given under heaven by which man can be saved, and that name is Jesus. And if you believe in him, you're saved. Whether it's some tattoo or chip or credit card or food, like all of these mark of the beast conspiracies really irritate me. And the unfortunate thing is it tends to be Christians that are less well read, that are more given to conspiracy theories and paranoia and fear, that will lap up these weird theories. So I think an important thing I wanted us to phrase before we read the conversation is that we are saved by grace through faith. That is true of the Old Testament, that is true of the New Testament. Anyone that gets into the kingdom of God will get into the kingdom by believing in Jesus. The mark of the beast is not going to, the mark of the beast, in my belief, based on my reading Revelations, is symbolic of rebellion against God in the end times. Anyone that rebels against God has the mark of the beast. But if you believe in Jesus and you follow him and you endure to the end, you will be saved. It's just that simple. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on to that before we move on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about conspiracy theories in a whole, like what you said about Christians being taken by them. There was a podcast I watched by Southside Rabbi, and Armin Hudson, one of the co-hosts, said something really important about conspiracy theories is like, if you're carried away by literally every wind of doctrine, like every conspiracy theory, you are right at the front. Then when you want to talk about what matters most to you, which is, as a Christian, the gospel, your credibility is finished. Because they're going to remember, wait, hold on, weren't you the person that was tweeting about the vaccine conspiracy? And weren't you the one tweeting about the Illuminati and how Jay-Z is the head and all of that sort of stuff? So when you want to tell somebody the truth of the gospel, which is what matters to you most, they're going to think, well, that must be a conspiracy too, because you're carried away by essentially lies. And as you said, I think conspiracy theories are exciting. They make you feel like you're like Sherlock Holmes or some sort of detective, and you get to look for clues and you get to find them. And it's like a never-ending trail. Like you don't know where to end. And I think we need to be, as believers who follow a man who's called the truth, we need to be people who are committed to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how boring it is, no matter who tells us the truth. Like whether the truth comes from a Christian or a secular person, truth belongs to Jesus. And every truth points to him, points to his worth, points to his glory, points to his nature. So I don't think we need to be worried that unbelievers found the truth or whatever, because the truth doesn't belong to them, it belongs to God. So I think we need to be very, very mindful about what we believe, and receive the truth for what it is, which is often boring. Like the truth isn't that exciting. Sometimes things are just what they are. Like, do you get what I mean? Like there's no deeper theory you need to find. Yeah, it's unprecedented that the vaccine came in 10 months, but that doesn't mean that it's demonic or that they're trying to kill you. It could just mean that it's come in 10 months. Like, like that one is the boring answer. It's not exciting. It doesn't make, I guess it doesn't make sense to people who aren't in science, but it's just that. It doesn't mean more. So I think, yeah, like you said, we need to be so committed to the truth, wherever it may take us.
Yeah, I think one thing that you made that's a very excellent point is the way in which I don't know why, but it's always the same pastors. And the problem is, like, when you're known as the conspiracy guy, it
Yeah.
makes it like it could be the case that this pastor that said that there's a concerted effort was actually telling the truth. Like, he's given. Someone told me yesterday that he's given prophetic words that were credible in the past, but now he's not sure. Now he's not sure. It's like it's the girl who is it the boy who cried wolf. It's like if you're always crying wolf, it's like the day where you're actually telling the truth. It's like, well, you've been saying all kinds of conspiracy theories. Like, why should we take you credibly now? Like, I remember like Pastor Chris is someone I have no problem naming. He was saying that the coronavirus was like going through 5G towers. And then he apologized and said that he changed his mind. Now, if this guy comes out, in fact, it's to the point where if he says that we shouldn't take the vaccine, I'd probably take the vaccine just because I want to do the opposite of what he says. That's how, like, incredible. Do you know what I mean? Like Kenneth Copeland, like these guys, I would probably do the opposite of what they said because I don't feel like their voice has no credibility. So I do think when you take the step of, making a claim as bold as this thing is there's an agenda, or this thing is the mark of the beast, like that has to be something that you're willing to stake your life and reputation on. And unfortunately, there's no cost with saying things that actually don't have any verifiable truth. And we know that because these pastors have made careers of saying nonsense and still have huge platforms. And one thing I also wanted to add as well is that people love, when you think about the media, people love fear. They love things that incite fear and concern and excitement. And I think a lot of people, even within the Christian community, I'm talking about in terms of TV evangelists, they take advantage of this because, we know that fear sells, sex, fear, excitement, controversy, these aren't things of God, but we know that people use these things as a vehicle for furthering their audience. And I think, like you said, I find the gospel exciting, but it's not exciting in a way that would be palatable to the world. Do you know what I mean? And I think you're right, to the natural man, and even to many Christians, the gospel message is not exciting. It's not sexy. It's not going to tingle your, cause you goosebumps all the time, but it will save you. And I think what we need to do as Christians is cultivate the ability to just be patient, to listen to sound teaching, and not run after the latest wind of doctrine. And unfortunately, these false teachers are capitalizing on fear and excitement and people's sensibilities to build a platform for themselves. And, Paul warns us in the book of Timothy about this, and in Titus as well, about how false teachers, and he actually says about seducing spirits. Let me find this verse, because I do think when people actually use fear and all these excitable emotions as a means to draw people to themselves, they are actually employing seducing spirits. It says in 1 Timothy 4:1 that now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and the teaching of demons. And I've always found that verse to be a very interesting and compelling verse. These seducing spirits that lure Christians away with weird ideologies. But yeah, I wanted to move on to another point because I think this is probably maybe the crux of the conversation. And the
Yeah.
next question I want to ask is, what would your opinion be on whether Christians should take the vaccine or not?
What I would say is, following on from what we were just talking about now about truth, is that we need to follow truth. There seems to be this disparity from even when I was a child, that somehow, Christians perpetuate it, unbelievers perpetuate it, that somehow science and God are incompatible. My
Mm,
question to that is why? If we're Christians, right, we believe that God created everything. Science is included in everything. And
mm,
I don't understand why we somehow think, maybe because science is predominantly made up of unbelievers. I don't know, but we somehow create a divide. And I
mm.
would say, I guess it's become kind of like a cliche, but believe the science, listen to truth, look at what companies are um, declaring, what data they're producing, and the data that I have seen is credible. Um, they've responded. Different companies, different countries have responded to this pandemic remarkably. I would even say not on Christian like way. The collaboration we've seen from countries, we don't see this usually. We don't see 80 countries collaborating on one drug. That doesn't happen. We don't see, for example, Oxford are willing to not make any profit during the pandemic. That things like this don't happen. These are, I believe, common grace in a time where we need it. We need to see it prevalent the most. I guess. So I would
Wait,
say,
but let me just interject because I think
yeah,
a lot of the things you're saying are valuable, but they may go over people's heads. Let's start
sure,
with the rational part. So
sure,
unfortunately, a lot of Christians have been brought up in a anti-intellectual culture. And what
yeah,
anti-intellectualism basically means is ideologies that resist the value of rational thought. And you might
sure,
hear things like, "Oh, in your church service, it's not about head knowledge," or
mm,
it's not about um, it's not we walk by faith and not by sight, and that's true.
mm, yeah,
Um, all these kind of ideas that make it feel like to think about your faith is to be too
mm,
fleshy or to be too natural. But I was thinking about is it Second Corinthians where Paul talks about the spiritual man can discern both the natural and the spiritual things, and I think as
mm,
believers we are able to both rationalize and
mm-hmm,
spiritualize. Oh, you're over spirit. Is it you're over spiritualizing? I don't know. Over under. But anyway, I think in the anti-intellectual camp, I think there's a lot of things that are done to make people feel that thinking about their faith is
yeah,
denying their faith. This is why
sure,
we have in some churches people can't ask questions to their pastors because like it's
yeah,
rebelling or them lacking faith. And I think you
yeah,
made an important point about accepting scientific evidence, listen to the
yeah,
scientific community is not
yeah,
denying your faith. Our
yeah,
faith is validated by science. If our faith is true, the scientific evidence will reconcile with it if the science is
exactly,
true. So we have
exactly,
no need to be afraid of the science. And actually, I was having a conversation with a pastor yesterday, and he was saying, well, if you believe what you believe is true, then you
mm,
shouldn't be afraid of that being scrutinized by scientific evidence, right?
exactly,
And I think we need to really appreciate that science and faith is not at loggerheads with each other. They're
exactly,
not mutually exclusive. There's a beautiful harmony between science and the faith that we have. But
exactly,
you made another point about the methods. So let's just go stage by stage into how this works. So the pandemic has been released. Or I
yeah,
don't want to say released because that makes it sound like that makes it sound like someone released it. But the pandemic
yeah,
occurs. So we see
yeah,
that the
yeah,
pandemic has started in China. I think
yeah,
it started in November 2019. So at some point, or that's when it started to be first reported. So
yeah,
at first point, there was a concerted effort to release a vaccine. Now, can you just take us through that process at a high level and how
yeah,
that would have looked like?
yeah.
And
So,
because I think one of the concerns that people have is that,
mhm,
and this is a concern that I had, this has
yeah,
happened very quickly.
sure,
So,
yeah,
so how do we make sense of this, the speed at with which this vaccine has come out?
yeah, yeah. So that's a really good question. So first of all, vaccines on average take about 10 years. The Ebola vaccine was only discovered earlier this year, if I'm not mistaken, and that took 42 years. So it can take a while. So one thing I would say is, yeah, as far the first cases were reported in November, December time, if I'm not mistaken, early December, I believe, in Wuhan, China. Um, it was declared to be the coronavirus, I believe, in January. Who changed it from, it was first of all stated as an epidemic. It changed to a pandemic in about February. It was given its name also in February as SARS CoV-2 because it affects your respiratory system. Mainly, it does affect other places as well. Obviously, as your respiratory system fails, these are obviously for people who are the severe patients, not everybody. And from March, who then announced it that, yeah, this is a pandemic, we've got to work on it. So the genetic code was actually discovered by China, I believe, in February. So the genetic code is essentially the makeup of the disease, and the makeup of the disease, knowing the makeup of the disease essentially allows you to be able to um, helps you with your diagnosis, also help you with kind of like medications and treatments that can be used to manage or treat any disease, essentially. What helps with the knowledge of the genetic code is the fact that we have, the human genome was completed over 20 years ago, so we can see how this disease relates to the human body. Also, coronavirus, so COVID-19 is not the first coronavirus. There's a group of coronaviruses. This is just a variation of those group of coronaviruses that is much deadly than the other ones. So we're not starting from kind of like scratch in the sense that we don't even know what this thing is called.
Right.
It's part of a
So is
group
that right? So that there was an existing body of knowledge about coronavirus that could have
in
been
general.
used to
Yeah,
further the vaccine. Okay.
exactly. So it's used in general, right? The reason why those is not helpful because this is this is a deadly version. So essentially, it kills. The other ones aren't deadly like COVID-19. So we don't have a treatment. We don't have any kind of like manage. So we were starting from scratch in the sense that we didn't know what this drug could do. What this disease could do. So as we were gaining more information, as more people were dying, more people were getting it, we were able to make more advances. And that leads to my second point about the speed of the vaccine. The speed of the vaccine has actually been helped by the fact that most people have got it, like everyone's got it. So you've got so much data to pull from. Usually with diseases, the spread is not as wide as this, so it takes longer. But because everyone's got it, like we were able to respond a lot faster to it. Also, it's a pandemic. Like speed is of the utmost is important. The slower you are, the more people will die. And that's why I was talking about the unprecedented collaboration. We don't see collaboration like this in most things.
But
Literally,
why is collaboration important though?
because different countries will have different kind of like medical systems. Obviously, not every country is made equal. America will have a greater, bigger, better medical system than like Bolivia, for example. So this collaboration, different minds, different facilities, allows you to do more things than you would if you just had it by yourself.
Is it right to say? Is it right to say, because I know typically, obviously, companies would be and countries would be researching medicines and vaccines and in competition with each other, but
Yeah,
because of the global scale of this pandemic,
yeah,
companies, rather than going against each other, are collaborating to ensure
exactly,
for the greater good that
exactly.
rather than profit, this vaccine is released even
Yeah,
faster. And actually,
exactly.
one thing I did want to say is it's interesting because we see during times of great crisis, a lot of the biggest technology innovations are released. So I was thinking
Mm,
about World War II, where the atom bomb was invented, where all
mhm,
kinds of different aerospace technologies were invented. And I
mhm.
think there is a truth to the idea that during times of crisis, people work a lot harder, a lot
Yeah,
more vehemently to release advances in technology. Even I
yeah.
think the radio was invented during one of the world wars. It's that so I think because it's a life or death situation, people are mobilized to work and collaborate a lot faster and quicker than they would do in normal times. So maybe that will
Exactly.
help explain why this has been a lot speedier than it would be in normal times.
Exactly, and a PhD scientist. She also illustrated a kind of like also part of the speed. So a lot of the process is paperwork. It's paperwork, getting grants, waiting. Like I had to do a grant for my part of my course. One of the modules I did was business project management and business planning. And that was from like the business project management side of science. It is long, and we had a shortened version of kind of like what a grant process will be. And guys, it takes ages. You have to talk about the space you're going to use, how you're going to get the space, how you're going to get money for the space, who do you need for the space, how you're going to pay them for the space, how you're going to advertise, how you're going to what way you're going to use a website, you're going to use posters, how many posters you're going to use, where you're going to put the posters. You have to tell these people everything, like how long it's going to take, what you're going to use. You're going to use animals. Why do you need to use the animals? Are they going to die? If they're going to die, what are you going to do about it? Do you need more animals if the animal dies? Where are you going to get your license from to use the animals? And then you have to get a license for humans, which is separate from the animals. Like, it is long, and also you're not explaining it to scientists. Usually the head of the body that you're referring to are other academics in different fields, just to explain to people not even scientists why this research is important. And the number of people that usually get grants is roughly about 10%. So imagine you can do all of this and still get no. And once your money finishes, your money gone. That's wherever you finish the experiment, you haven't finished the experiment, that research is finished until you get more funding. So these are people's life work, right? This is people's reputation. To get a grant is not simple. So people are working so hard in whatever industry or field that they're in for their whatever research it is. So you're kind of to say when people say that they're evil or they're trying to kill us or whatever, like you have to realize what you're saying. Like, these are people who may be working on one cell for 30, 40 years, who are looking for grants, looking for for money, for loans, to fund their research, who might
So
not
can I
even
just
get that. So, yeah.
Can I just translate it? Because obviously, maybe someone that's not from an academic background might not understand what you said. So I took two things from what you said. The first thing I took from what you said is that there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that holds back scientific research in usual times, right?
Yeah.
So it's very slow, it's very bureaucratic, and there's also a very high chance of failure. So
Yeah.
I would imagine, given the current pandemic, any research relating to the coronavirus would have been expedited and would have been given prioritization for funding. So that would explain speed. I think a second thing is in line with the concern about the conspiracy. If somebody has dedicated their life to scientific research, like they're basically putting their livelihood on the line, and not only their livelihood, their reputation and their life's work on the line to do some kind of to buy into some kind of global conspiracy agenda. And I think from that perspective, I think you're making the point that this doesn't make sense for someone to do that.
Exactly. And I think also to make it, I guess, to add some theology to the argument, is I think sometimes we have a poor and unbiblical view of evil. I think when we think of evil, we're thinking of this big, bad thing, someone trying to kill you, or someone trying to point. We think of Hitler, like Hitler's evil, I'm good. And it's like, evil's not always like that. Like, if we look at Romans 1, what does Paul say? Paul calls evil a worship of the creation over the creator. But God called creation good, right? So the problem isn't always you doing something that is objectively bad towards someone else or towards something. Sometimes it's just elevation of a good thing. So, for example, with the vaccine, the evil of the vaccine is not necessarily that it might kill people or that they're trying to make money. The evil of the vaccine could be the fact that it doesn't resound in praise to God, but it resounds to praise to science. Does that make sense? So, like, I think sometimes that's what we think when we think of evil wrongly, and it's quite a myopic view. So I think that's also something we should think about when it comes to the vaccine, because we've been praying, God, we want normality. God, this has been a difficult year, and then God has helped produce a vaccine. God has governed the production of a vaccine in 10 months, and all of a sudden it's impossible that God was involved. Why? Like what do you want? You wanted a miracle. God has given you a miracle. Like, this is this is insane that 90 an efficacy 95%
90%.
for a vaccine in 10 months has been produced. That is remarkable, and it can't be God. Why can't it be? So I think that is what we also should think about. And
That's a very good point. We should be asking the question: is this the sovereign providence of God? Right? Christians have been praying, have been petitioning God, interceding for months for God to intervene. And it's like, well, what else do you expect? Did you expect the coronavirus cases to suddenly disappear? And it's like we've had like a vaccine be released in record times, and it's like a lot of these Christians that were praying for God to intervene are now skeptical of the vaccine. And I think the unfortunate thing is a lot of the skepticism is rooted in misinformation, and a lot of the power structures in Christianity perpetrating a lot of this misinformation. So I think that's a very important food for thought. Like, we have been praying, having prayer calls, calling on to God, like, God intervene in the situation. A vaccine comes and everyone's like, and the funny thing is, when I surveyed people, are you going to take it? Everyone's like, no. So it's like, well, if you're on a vaccine, how are you expecting God to intervene in this situation? And that's a question I have to ask myself, because I too have been concerned about the safety of this vaccine. But if you could just quickly take us through the clinical trial process, what are the stages? So just very quickly begin to, what are the stages?
So it's either like 3 phases or like 5 stages. So obviously there is the idea, the planning part of it, and then the first is to actually look at the, kind of like the safety of the vaccine. So it'll be usually done on like cells or something, animal cells, human cells. The next stage will be on like animals, again testing the safety of it and the efficacy of it. And that's like stage 2, stage 3. Obviously, during this stage is usually like clinical data is being processed, is being collected, as well, to kind of like for the research paper that's going to be produced later on. Then a small group of people will be used, like a small cohort of people will be given like the best type of clinical trials are like a double-blind randomized one. So there'll be a placebo and there'll be the actual drug that they're trying to test. So a double-blind randomized trial essentially is that both the clinician and the patient don't know what they've taken. Right. So that's to obviously to avoid bias.
So is that one fake drug is being given, which is called a placebo, and one real one is given, and you kind of compare the results against two groups? Exactly.
And like I said, the clinician doesn't know that the patient doesn't know. And that's kind of like the gold standard of clinical trials. So if you want to see, basically, if you want to know if a good trial has been done, that's what you're looking for. So after that had done, is safe. That hasn't been any adverse effects beyond what they kind of expect. It moves on to kind of like a bigger group of people. So that might be like 2,000 to 3,000 people. And again, that's looking at the efficacy and it's still again the safety of the drug.
So there's two key things. So just for everyone that's watching, there's 2 key things to keep in mind: safety and efficacy. You want to make sure the drug is effective, and you want to make sure that it's safe to use. Yeah, but go on.
Exactly. And then the last one, because obviously vaccines are to boost your immune system. So you want also look at the immunogenicity, which is obviously just to see how immune you are to well, this is specific for vaccines. For drugs to be slightly different, because drugs are treatments as well. So that will be a different thing for drugs. But just specifically for vaccines, you're also looking at kind of the immunogenicity as well. But these would be kind of like for the best type of clinical trials. And then a bigger last cohort, stage 5, will be just before kind of like the regulatory. So in this stage, regulations are being processed as well to ensure that the drug is safely regulated, and that there is rules and regulations that each clinical trial has to follow. There's licenses, like I said, you have to apply for, or you can lose your license essentially. So once a bigger cohort has been done, so this is usually like tens of thousands of people of different ages, different ethnicities, sometimes even different parts of a country. And it'll be for a while, it'll be for like 2 years or something like that. So even with the vaccine now, the people that have been part of the clinical trial are going to be followed For the Pfizer one, it's 26 months, so it's still going to be followed and looked after, and to see what the see the kind of the progress of the drug within them. So let's say stage 5 has happened, everyone's fine, nothing out of the ordinary has happened in these stages, then it's kind of got the stamp of approval, then it's sent off to be licensed. So this goes to an independent body to look at the data and essentially see that nothing untoward has happened within the experiment. And once it's licensed, is then you're then able to kind of like start selling it and start distributing it. That's kind of like a very basic overview of what a clinical trial is.
Right. So where were we in this process?
So now Pfizer and Moderna, so two of the companies, have completed their clinical trial, and Pfizer, for example, have released a 146-page report on the stages that they've done.
Right.
So they highlighted this as phases rather than stages. So they did phase 1, 2, and 3, which again highlights what I said. Phase 1, 2, and 3 is basically from the small cohort of people to a large kind of larger thousands of group of people, and they have essentially regulated it, but is not licensed. So I know that's caused people some concern, especially when the paper came out that they've got, the government gave Pfizer immunity. So
wait, let's hold on a second. So what you're saying is that Pfizer have released a 140-page report, so we can actually go online now and read into that report, read into their research methods, their findings. So if anyone is interested in finding out more about the Pfizer vaccine, you can actually read their own report and scrutinize it yourself. I think one thing we definitely shouldn't do, because I've seen all kinds of weird videos. Someone said something about RNA, which apparently modifies people's DNA. Like
what? Like it doesn't. That's Jesus. That's literally. I'm not being arrogant. That's GCSE biology. Everyone should know that doesn't happen. Like you don't even need to be a university student to know that. That's not even true. That's ridiculous. Yeah.
But you know what? Yeah, I've actually seen that video. Yeah, it was one woman. Yeah, she was saying. It's the way she did it. Yeah, she's like, she goes, oh, there's RNA. Go to Wikipedia. Now look at this reverse. Oh, it's gene modification. And I'm like thinking, well, what the hell? Like, is this like? It reminds me of like American Werewolf, like where it like makes you like kind of like grow hair and then convert into some kind of beast. And I'm just like, is this for real? But I think one problematic thing is a lot of people are taking their science from like Facebook groups and WhatsApp videos. But I think the good thing about the transparency that's being done here is that if you really do want to understand like the methods, what's inside the vaccine and things like that, you can actually go on their websites and read the report yourselves.
Exactly.
And I think obviously a lot of people don't have the appetite to do that, so they'll go to that the WhatsApp videos and the Facebook videos to consume their scientific information. But yeah, sorry, as you were saying.
No, like you were saying, they've been so transparent, not just Pfizer, Moderna, Oxford, AstraZeneca. They've been super transparent with their findings. So they're not hiding anything. They've released, even Oxford released that, they didn't give the right dose the first time, and it was a top-up dose that showed the efficacy went from 70 to 90%. So like they have nothing to hide. Like I said, if you want to read what Pfizer have done, the page is there. The report is there on their page. Just type in Pfizer paper is the first link on Google. You can read it. Is right there. So like regulation is not like, so every drug has to be regulated, right? If your drug isn't regulated, that's why you get sued, and that's why some companies get sued, because it comes out that they didn't follow regulation protocols. So license is kind of like this independent body, and that this doesn't mean that the clinical trial hasn't got any independent review. It just means that the independent bodies, so like an FDA or MHRA or whatever your body is in your particular part of the world, hasn't given it kind of like the business license, I guess, for it to go into shops and into pharmacists and stuff like that. However, there is a special dispensation within the regulatory bylaws for pandemics, which is what was actioned for Pfizer. Because because again, a lot of it is paperwork, as I said previously. We don't have time for this extra paperwork. So they've released their data. It's obviously been reviewed, and people I can't remember who, the National Institute of Biological Regulation or something. They've looked at their drug, and they have agreed that it is safe. So they will not ever bring forth a drug that isn't safe. Now, this isn't to say that they haven't done this before. Pfizer do have a lot of very, very high profile cases where they have done some bad science. But on their website, they have got protocols now on safety regulations. They've got code of conduct and stuff like that. So they do have things in place where hopefully this doesn't happen again, but they do have some really high profile cases. So if that's one of the reasons why you are apprehensive about Pfizer, I completely understand that. They do have some terrible, like terrible stuff.
Well, let me just stop you there. Like, because I think one of the comments that people are raising, and it's been like, okay, well, Pfizer's had a history of various incidents around the world.
Yeah.
I think there's two things to consider. One is Pfizer's a global company.
Yeah.
And two is that every industry has companies, especially global ones, where there's scandals. And at least from working in the financial services industries, when there is a scandal, one, they get fined heavily. And two, there's non-stop internal training to ensure that this never happens again. Not just training, but changes of policy, codes of conduct. Like, these companies don't want to just throw away money to regulators, and they get fined billions. And I remember working in a financial services industry, that the way they will change processes and train you until you're sick of that issue is unreal. Like, we had issues in the financial crisis with bribery, with corruption. So what they do is they change their internal processes and training to ensure that that thing doesn't happen again. Because obviously they're not just trying to give away billions in fines. So I think one thing that's important to consider when you see a scandal that happened 10 or 20 years ago is, okay, there was a scandal, but is there anything that company did in response to that thing? You know, if they're getting fined year after year, then you might say, okay, there's a recurring pattern here. But if it's happened 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and they've been fined for it, there's a very good chance that they've changed their internal processes and procedures to ensure that that thing doesn't happen again. And often is the case that, you know, it's like a rogue actor within the organization or someone that's not following protocol who will be disciplined. So for me personally, I'm not too concerned about something happening in the past. Like, every global company that you can think of has had some kind of scandal. You don't say, well, I'm not going to put my money inside the bank account. Like, the banks have been responsible for some of the worst, you know, atrocities, yet people still use bank accounts. I think people have the intuition to recognize that the failings of a company in the past shouldn't cause you to maintain unnecessary suspicion in the future. And like you said, you know, Pfizer have released their report. You can read the report, which I'm sure most people aren't going to do. But, you know, if you're not going to read it, then let's not levy, you know, unnecessary conspiracy. But I want to focus on the point you made, because I still do have some real concerns, not necessarily because I'm concerned, but because I don't understand. So right now we have a drug that's regulated, but it's not licensed. How do we make sense of that distinction?
So like I said, there's bylaws, particularly for kind of like extenuating circumstances, such as a pandemic, where a drug can be released after it's been regulated but not licensed, kind of like to speed up the process to get it released under a special dispensation. So like I said, things have come out where they have kind of been protected by the government, and which what also hasn't helped is Pfizer are not releasing the reasons why they applied for it. They have their own reasons why they applied for this kind of special dispensation from the government, but they're not releasing it. I don't really know why.
Wait, what do you mean? Sorry, explain that point again.
Yeah, so in kind of like the news report that declared, I think it was the Independent, that stated that they're going to get special dispensation. The CEO of Pfizer basically said that they have their own reasons. They're just not going to release them to the general public as to why they want the special dispensation.
What is a special dispensation again? Sorry.
So the special dispensation is that basically they can't be sued. So if somebody dies or if somebody has an adverse reaction that might not be a part of the side effects, which they have again reported in their paper, the different side effects that they've seen, that you can't basically sue them. So
Right.
let's say I don't know, organ failure wasn't in the side effects, and then somebody gets liver organ failure. The family can't just basically go, okay, Pfizer, you didn't put organ failure in your in your side effects in your paper. We want 3 million. You can't basically do that anymore. So this is like what, like, so that means anything can happen to me? And no. So number one, it could just mean that you have produced side effects that they didn't see in their paper, which is definitely, which is totally possible. It could mean that if you're taking medication, the Pfizer vaccine could have potentially reacted to it. And unfortunately, you've responded in such a way. You could have underlying illness. There's so many kind of like different aspects that could have happened that could cause you to react adversely to the vaccine. You'd be surprised even in small things. Like when you're going for like an injection, you're going for like a surgery, they tell you that don't eat 24 hours beforehand.
Right.
Especially for like a blood test, you'd be surprised how many people still eat.
I'm still eating.
Yeah, you'd be surprised when people like still eat, and they'll be looking like, raw, like your blood sugar's bare high. Like, is it right? Oh, I had McDonald's on the way here. They're like, what? So do you know what I mean? So like, you'd be surprised.
But you know what? For me, yeah, I would understand what I'm not a scientist. Do you know what I mean? So I'm thinking maybe there's the same, like to be extra, like it's gonna be calm. Why would you not need to eat? Why would you like? I know it's a bit of a tangent, but I'm just curious. Why would you not eat before a blood test?
So for example, if you're trying to work out your glucose levels, that's basically like if you're eating carbs, that obviously increases your glucose.
Oh, boost your glucose. Okay.
Yeah. So like if you're trying to test blood glucose, like if you're pre-diabetic or something like that, and you've now basically messed up your results. You don't have to come in again.
I see, but
so if
they wouldn't. So it will basically skew the results of your blood test if you. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So so guys, please, when your doctor says something, just listen to them. And like just listen to them. Not in every. If you don't understand, obviously ask. But like they're not just telling you not to eat because they're being bad man. That it is helpful. So so things like that. And unfortunately, we're not sovereign. We don't know everything that happens in the body. Some things do happen, and it's not necessarily malpractice. It's just a really unfortunate. And I don't want to make it seem like people are just numbers, and it just is. Like it is unfortunate, and my heart does go out to people who do suffer from adversely from the vaccine, because people will probably die. People will probably get sick. It probably will happen. But that does not mean that they've done something wrong in their study, or they've done something wrong in their practice. Is the fact that the vaccine isn't perfect. Like it's not God. Like it's imperfect people did make it. They followed the science. They were robust in their protocols. They didn't produce fake results, but everyone is different. We all have different genetic makeups. We all have different environments. We all have different lifestyles. You can have an adverse reaction, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they've done something wrong. There have been independent reviews. So like in the paper, they did there was 2 reviews of their process. One internal by their own internal body, and then one external by another body. So they have got that as well, which again is also in the paper, if you so choose to read it. So yeah.
So
So
what we're saying is that they've obtained regulation by showing their clinical trials. The regulators are comfortable with regulating the vaccine to be administered. But I think what you're saying is that the licensing process can only conclude after the 26-month testing period to see what happens in that 26 months. So what it sounds like, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, is the companies, the medical companies have done all the due diligence they can to ensure that in principle this vaccine is safe and is efficacious for the vast majority of people. But the reality of this vaccine and all vaccines is that there is no scientific way to accommodate an entire population of people in all their different environments, unique situations, the medications they may be taking, their biological makeup, and say that you absolutely anyone who takes this vaccine is going to be safe. This is not possible to do that, and I don't think that's unique to this vaccine.
Yeah, they won't claim that. They won't claim that.
And I don't think that if I'm not mistaken, that wouldn't have been true of any vaccine that's ever been made in history.
No one will ever claim that. Yeah.
Yeah. So claim that. It's impossible to release a vaccine that is, I guess, undisputably 100% safe. And I think, given the global population that will be taking it, there are some people that are going to have experienced some adverse side effects, like you would any drug. Like paracetamol, you might experience side effects. And there may be some people that may possibly die. But I think when we say that it is a safe drug, we're saying that in principle, for the vast majority of people, that it is safe for them to use. Now, I guess the difficult thing is, there's two things I think is difficult. One that's difficult is that even if it's a small chance, there's still a possibility of dying. And two, I guess a lot of people might have discomfort with the idea that there is a legal immunity that these companies have if something goes wrong. So explain to me if I'm wrong. But what it looks like is that Pfizer have outlined their understanding of what the side effects are based on the medical case studies that they carried out amongst the tens of thousands of people that have been a part of this clinical trial. And they've documented, these are the side effects that we understand. Right. So if those side effects are documented, and if you experience those side effects, there wouldn't be any legal liability on Pfizer, because they've outlined that, look, this is what we understand. Now, it seems what they've applied for is a special dispensation, so that if there's something that happens outside of what they've defined as a known side effect, they also be legally liable. So I just want you to explain so knowing those things, knowing one, that there may be some other side effects, and two, that there may be a small but real possibility of dying, how then, from a public health perspective, can we reassure people that it's still a good idea to take the vaccine?
Like I said, it's a difficult one. This is a difficult question because, like I said, the Pfizer bosses have not or will not explain why they need it. I think it's kind of understandable, like I said, that they would apply for it because it is a license. A licensing can take, there's no set time. It could take years. There's no set time. So, barring any kind of like adverse reactions, it will be licensed eventually. But in terms of like why we can still trust it, let's assume that Pfizer don't care about you. They don't care about human beings. Like you said, they don't want to pay billions. This has no benefit to them. They already have bad credibility. In 2017, they were voted out of 17 pharmaceutical companies, they were voted bottom as those with in terms of reputation. Like, their reputation is really low. They do not want to increase this this by any stretch of the imagination. Additionally, they collaborated with another company called BioNTech as well, so their reputation is also on the line. Working with Pfizer, I'm not too sure whether their BioNTech is a subsidiary or they're a separate company, but I know that two on the paper shows two separate companies as part of the study. So I think what we need to look at is, like I said, their paper, their study, and their claims. What do they claim the vaccine is going to do? So the purpose of this vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, is to prevent the coronavirus in healthy individuals. That's their aim. So I think what we should do is we should kind of take their study against what their aim is, and not just against like some random arbitrary aim that we've made up. I say, look, see, they didn't do like the vaccines don't, because people say, oh, is it to cure people? Vaccines don't cure, they prevent. That's the purpose of it. So also, I think we should be kind of fair in our critique. And like I said, like scientific research, the kind of like the overarching aim of scientific research is for public health. The government, as we've probably seen, care about the economy. Maybe people will say over people. Dead people can't help the economy. Sick people can't help the economy. They want you guys alive. And I think pharmaceutical companies understand total depravity enough to know that you're going to be sick. They don't need to help you. you're going to fall sick. If it's not the coronavirus, it will be cancer. If it's not cancer, it'll be diabetes. If it's not diabetes, it'll be the flu. If it's not the flu, it'll be something new. Your people will get sick. They don't need your help. They don't need to help you. So I think we need to understand that the season that we're in and give dispensation based upon the season. I think where you could be, what you could be, if they, for example, they decided to change like whole laws around kind of regulation and licensing, they thought, okay, from now on, you don't need to license, you could just release. Then I'd be like, cool, okay, that's a bit strange. But like I said, they didn't create a new law. They just applied what already existed.
And I think what you raised a really good point around reputation. So I didn't know that thing about Pfizer's reputation. I mean, that might make people feel a bit uncomfortable that they would have a bad reputation. But I think if they get this wrong, like there is no bigger PR scandal in history than getting the coronavirus vaccine wrong. And I don't think this would be the end of Pfizer if it was like a huge catastrophe. You know what I mean? Because this is the company essentially putting their name on the line. And I guess an important thing to ask, and I'm not defending the vaccine, but just trying to think critically, is that if this company is already fighting to improve its reputation, why would it stake its reputation by, providing a vaccine for what is arguably one of the biggest issues, medical issues in recent human memory? So that's one thing to think about. But yeah, I think this approaching in this conversation, and I'm keen to get some of your closing thoughts as well. I think one thing that I appreciate about this conversation is that we've been able to demystify a lot of the weird, conspiracy theory, mark of the beast ideologies around this vaccine. Like, I don't think there's any credibility to any of these conspiracy theories around this kind of concerted global effort to destroy people's salvation or to kill people. It's just like, there's much more effective ways to kill people if that's really what they got. And one thing I always find really weird is that it's like the conspiracy theories that the government wanted to kill people in their own country. Like, how does that make any sense? Why would you want to kill your own population? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. I remember Donald Trump was saying that coronavirus was released from China to attack America. It's like, why would you release a pandemic that antagonizes your own country and cause a global catastrophe to attack America? It doesn't. When you hold it up to that basic levels of critical thought, it doesn't make any sense. So I don't think there's like a conspiracy theory, but I do think there is real risk, and I think we need to be sober-minded when thinking about this risk. I think we need to make individual judgments about, the special dispensation that's been afforded to Pfizer, the risks that are associated with all vaccines, and I guess the cost benefit for taking it. Now, what I've seen from the American government, and I'm pretty sure the British government will follow suit, is that this vaccine is not a mandatory virus. You're not going to be forced to take this vaccine. So I think it's about you making an informed decision, read the research, go to primary sources, avoid the WhatsApp groups and the Facebook groups and the controversial articles, and just read the data. If you are really concerned about the safety of this vaccine. But I really want to encourage people to just make informed scientific decisions about this, and in doing so, you're not denying your faith.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't know if you had any closing remarks or comments that you wanted to make today.
Yeah, I think you said probably the best word we need in this season is soberness. Please be sober-minded. Don't be caught up with weird stuff and carry lies and spread them, because you may think of it as a WhatsApp group or as a Facebook group. God calls it slander and lying, and I think we need to remember that we shouldn't get caught up in, because it's Facebook, that we think God somehow turns a blind eye to that. Like, what we spread, what we say, what we consume matters. So please keep that in mind. And like I said, I'm not saying this so you can believe me. I will be taking the vaccine, but I will say, like Demi said, please think critically about it. Just pray about it. Absolutely. Look at the data and feel comfortable. And also remember that taking the vaccine is a way of loving our neighbors. Whilst you may not be fearful of the virus, I'm certainly not, or of getting it or anything else. I think in terms of looking after our neighbors, I have people in my home who are high risk. So I think loving our neighbors is an important way. Even if you don't want to think of yourself, you're not worried about it, fine. But what about your elderly neighbor or the men and women at your church that may be high risk? I think that also should be taken into consideration when deciding whether or not you're going to take the vaccine. Finally, I would say, listen, if you're getting information from something that says scienceisevil.org, please don't read from there. It's not a legitimate website. Go to actual scientific, reputable websites, you know, PubMed, Google Scholar, New Scientist, Nature, places like that will break down scientific research, will give you actual credible sources, and not just some weird link that isn't even by a scientist. And yeah, and God be with us like through this next stage. I think it's exciting, but that's as a scientist, but I do get the apprehension as well. And also, you're not crazy for being apprehensive. You're not crazy for being cautious. But please don't let your caution take you to lies, and misinformation.
I heard that, yeah, and I thank you for everything you said. That's a very good food for thought you said about your you know, being your brother's keeper, because I think a lot of the ways that people are thinking about this virus is, well, me. And I think obviously given our individualistic culture, I don't think people are actually factoring in the public good when they're thinking about the decision to take this vaccine, even to the point where they would be willing to risk their own lives or own safety for potentially for the greater good of society. That's just not, that just isn't in the consciousness of people, unfortunately.
Yeah.
At least in this part of the world. But one thing I did read, and I think one thing I'd be interested in just to get your thoughts on, is what level of immunization do we need in this country to be comfortable that we can weather this pandemic? Because I know we're never going to get 100% immunization.
No.
Do you know what level of immunization that we need?
I believe I read that it's about 50%. That we only need about 50% of the country to get vaccinated. I think we'll get that. I think we'll get more than that, to be fair. I think most people will take it. So we should be fine. But don't take my word as gospel. It's kind of like the whole voting thing. I didn't vote because, and then there's like 20 million people that don't vote. So I would say still don't not get it because you feel, oh, though, well, everyone else on my street's gonna get it. That shouldn't be part of your thinking, I don't think. But yeah, about 50% should do it, I think.
Yeah, so I think thank you for that today. I think everyone's had great information in this conversation. I mean, I'm still doing a lot of my own research and coming to my conclusions about the vaccine. I'm definitely not one of those people that will jump out on major things like this and say, oh, don't do it or do it, you know, without reading the science, without coming to an informed conclusion. So I think a big takeaway from this, for me in this conversation, was doing critical thinking, doing your research, and also I think a good point Trudeau raised towards the end is actually it's not just about you. This is really a nationwide effort, and I think the thing that about this year is that we have gone through this pandemic together. We've lost family members, we've lost friends, like everybody. I think the unique thing about this pandemic that's kind of brought everyone together is that this year has been a year that has affected us all in very difficult ways. So we're not, although, you know, Boris Johnson has said this as political jargon, you know, we're in this together. It really is the case that we are in this together, and we're only going to get out by, you know, collaboration and by, you know, thinking about the needs of the greater good. So I hope that leaves you guys with food for thought. Please do your research, pray about it, think about it, but yeah, just be very careful about the information you consume. But on that note, Trude, do you want to give them your social media handles where they can follow you and find out more? Trude's Twitter account is amazing. Honestly, you need to follow this guy on Twitter.
Thank you, man. I'm humbled. But yeah, you can follow me at Trude, so CHUDEOBUAYA, Trude Obuaya, on Twitter, Instagram. Yeah, same thing.
Okay. Yeah, definitely follow Trude. I love him. He's definitely one of my favorite Twitter accounts. You can follow me at Demi _ Irawo. That's IRAWO. And yeah, on that note, thank you guys so much for being a part of this conversation. We've really enjoyed having you as part of this live show. We will be back next week with another interesting topic. But on that note, have an amazing Saturday. And until the next time, peace.